Welcome to the Newsmakers Podcast. I'm Billy Hollowell, and this is a show where we go behind the headlines every day to bring you an interview with a pastor, entertainer, politician, or other notable news figure. And this is a show, again, it's daily, but it's based on our weekly TV show, which is also called Newsmakers. You can watch it on the CBN News channel and also on our YouTube page. And on this show, every day, we dive deep. It's a little more longer form with one of the people who you will often see on our Newsmakers show or across the CBN News platforms. On today's Newsmakers, Holocaust survivor Jack Wurfl knows what antisemitism can breed. He was forced to hide out and conceal his identity during the Holocaust and lost every one of his family members aside from his brother. He is joining us today to talk about his story, and his story is told in the book, by the way, My Two Lives, which you can get wherever books are sold. But he's here today with a warning about what is happening on our campuses, how young people are not being told the truth, that and more on today's Newsmakers. With no further ado, here is Jack. Jack, you are a Holocaust survivor, and you have told your story to me before. It's an incredibly moving story. But there's a lot going on in the world right now, in America and across the globe, a lot of anti-Semitism, a lot of anti-Israel sentiment. What has it been like to watch these things unfold?
Well, I think it's pretty terrible for people like myself to watch this, because the last Holocaust back in Hitler's regime started for certain reasons also. This is just another reason that could eventually possibly end up cause a similar problem. And I just hope it doesn't, but, one has to think about it. And it's kind of frightening, It's a terrible thing to think about. And I would
I was just going to say to you, a lot of people are looking at what is happening on college campuses. They're watching these protests, and even Benjamin Netanyahu, has said this is reminiscent of things that were seen before the Holocaust. And I wanted to ask you about that because you experienced this. You went through the Holocaust. Do you see parallels between some of what we're watching happen, broadly right now and what you experienced as a child?
Yes, I think so. Yes. I mean, it's different. It's beginning to come about differently, but for different reasons. But yes, it's frightening, because it could end up in the same sort of situation eventually. And it's frightening, And I just don't understand it, how people can feel like this again, that they don't know what happened during the Holocaust back during Hitler's regime, It was so terrible. I mean, 7 million people were killed as a result of it. And God forbid anything like this would ever happen again. And one would think that once this happened, it could never happen again, that people have learned from this. But I'm beginning to wonder, because the younger people nowadays don't know anything about the Holocaust. I mean, I think half of the younger people have never even heard of it, don't even know the details of it. It's frightening, and I can't understand that our education hasn't been better to let the kids know what happened, because that's one of the main things of history ever in this, that we can think of.
Yeah, they say history repeats itself, which is, a common phrase. And yet here we are, we're watching this. You've written a book about your story and your life. It's called My Two Lives. And I want to talk a little bit more about some of the other things. But before we get to some of the current events, help us understand, because for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about how your family and your life, and I know this is a broad question, but I'm going to throw it to you, how you were affected personally by what Hitler did and by the Holocaust.
Yeah, well, the worst thing was I lost my entire family I lost my father, who had become a political prisoner and was at Sachsenhausen in the concentration camp. And my mother was arrested by the Gestapo and the SS, and she was taken to Auschwitz, and she was killed there. And then all my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, my nephews, everybody in my family eventually was killed during that period of time. So that the only people who survived the war in that period of time was my brother Peter and myself.
Wow. You know, as you're describing that, it's unimaginable. Anybody who's listening to this or watching this, thinking about their own family, their own parents, their brothers, their sisters, to have your entire family wiped out over just sheer hatred. When you look at what's happening today and you reflect back on what already happened, not just in the Holocaust, obviously events that preceded that in history, but the Holocaust being the most recent horror before October 7th, what do you think drives this irrational hatred of the Jewish people?
Well, that's a very good question. You know, I've been asking that all my life. I say, what is anti-Semitism? I know what the word means, but why? Why? Why do we hate the Jews so much, you know? I think every country where the Jews lived in past centuries, those countries actually benefited from the Jewish people living there, but eventually they were thrown out or they had to leave. It's just very, very hard to believe. I think the Jewish people as a whole are very industrial people. They're very educated, conscious of good education for their children and for their families. And they work very hard and they like to be successful. And in many cases, they are very successful. And I just don't understand where this hate is coming from. What are the Jewish people doing that is so horrible? I mean, right now we have these things going on in the colleges. Yeah, you know, they see thousands of people dying in Palestine. But why? The Jews never started a war. They never have started a war. And here again, Hamas is the one who started it. What were the Jews supposed to do? Are they supposed to sit back like they did during Hitler days and let them come in and just slaughter them and kill them? They never fought really against Hitler in those days, except maybe a little bit in Warsaw during the Warsaw Ghetto. Otherwise, they never really fought the Germans. And the Jews never had their own country, which was one of the things that why they were always kicked out and thrown out wherever they lived. And here, and after the war was over, and people came back from these concentration camps, people were so upset about all of this, that anything like this would happen. And they all decided, the United Nations decided in 1948 that the Jews should have their own country. And this was their promised land. So they gave the Jews the country which they called Israel, and that is their country. And you know what? They are not going to give it up again. This time, they're not going to lay back and let everybody kill them. They're going to fight. And they're going to fight to the last soul, the last person. That's my opinion, at least, you know.
Well, and you went through this. I mean, you saw what happens when this this idea, and I think people are having a hard time understanding it. It's very frustrating to me to watch it because it feels like common sense that you have groups of people who are saying, you know, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, they want to wipe Israel off the map and get rid of it. And yet people aren't understanding what that means, you know? And so you have so much confusion around what's very clear that Israel is defending itself against these existential threats. And anybody would defend themselves against those threats, especially after October 7th and what we saw happen. What was your reaction? What was your reaction to that October 7th?
Well,
Because
it was a huge surprise to me. You know, I didn't think this would happen again. And when that happened, that was just a horrible, horrible thing for that to happen. And I didn't surprise that Israel it decided immediately to fight back. They had no choice. Absolutely, they have no choice. And right now, you know, the Jews were trying to get some kind of an agreement with Hamas and told them, you let our people go that you are still holding as prisoners or whatever, and we'll have a ceasefire. And Hamas did not go along with that. You know, they said no. So what are they looking for? They're looking for what we're getting right now. And it's just unbelievable what's happening to our colleges. And not only our colleges, these are bright kids. They're the smartest people in the world in these colleges, and the people who run these universities and colleges. And look what they're doing. They're not helping.
Yeah.
You know, we have a couple of these university presidents already who are in trouble because of some of the things that they said. I don't know how serious their trouble are, but how can they say such a thing? These are educated people, the most educated people in the world. And this is, you know, in my opinion, it's just impossible. It's just, I'm just amazed that this could happen. I did not think that anything like this could happen again here at our universities.
Yeah, especially in America. I mean, to have people chanting, whether it's one person or three people, things like, these supportive messages for Hamas, these anti-American messages that we're seeing. What would your message, Jack, be to young people today who some of them seem very confused about the Holocaust, about the situation in Israel, about the Jewish people? What would your message be to them to maybe help them get a grip on what is actually happening?
Well, you know, I wrote this book because actually, I think I mentioned it to you before, that my daughter and her husband asked me to write the book, even though people had asked me all my life to write a book about my life. And I always told them, I said, there were thousands of people the same thing happened to. Let someone else write the book. But finally, my daughter and her husband convinced me to write a book, so that at least my family, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, et cetera, would always know what happened to our family and why, and how did we get to this country, and how did we live over here, you know? And that's why I wrote the book. And I had no idea that this book would be publicized and you know, as it is right now. Hundreds of these books already, you know, in the mainstream now, to be read by people. And I'm just hoping that young people would get this book and get educated and read the story. How would they feel if they would be in this story? You know, this could happen to anyone, any minority for that matter. It always seems that the minorities are the ones that are in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, this is a story, the book is My Two Lives, that people need to pick up. They need to read it. They can see what you went through, and you've built an incredible life for yourself, you know, in America after going through unthinkable things, losing your family. And I just so appreciate you joining us, taking us through your thoughts on this. I think you're the perfect person for us to hear from in the midst of so much misinformation, disinformation. Jack, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Well, absolutely. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to talk to you about it, and hopefully other people will hear about it and will understand what happened to families like mine.
That's all for today's Newsmakers podcast. Be sure to tune in for the next episode of the show, and also head over to the CBN News YouTube channel and the CBN News channel to watch Newsmakers every week. We'll see you soon.